Why would anyone play Darkest Dungeon? Let me break it down for you. Gameplay that feels like torture at first, but becomes highly addictive as you get better. Impressive 2D graphics, aesthetics, and sound design, which immerse you into the dark and rotten world of the game. Simple yet effective narrative that encourages you to get to the end and learn the secrets of your ancestor. But also frustrating learning curve, RNG mechanics, and a lot of grinding. This game is extremely polarizing, with some people absolutely hating it, while others consider it to be a classic. I will try to be as neutral as I can and explain both the good and the ugly aspects of it. Welcome to the Darkest Dungeon. The developers describe Darkest Dungeon as a challenging gothic roguelike turn-based RPG about the psychological stresses of adventuring, which is mostly correct. The game is actually not a roguelike, but I will get into that later. The premise of the game is quite simple. You have your base of operations, a small hamlet. Here you recruit new heroes, manage their skills and equipment, upgrade buildings, and basically spend your resources. Once you are ready to go, you pick a mission in one of the 4 main regions, assemble a team, buy provisions for the journey, and venture into the darkness. During the raid, you navigate the area like a dungeon crawler, using a minimap that shows you your current position, the layout of the level, and things you have discovered. Each hallway will have random things you can interact with, chests, shrines, and all kinds of curios. You can notice them from afar and ignore them if needed. Now, there will also be random enemy encounters and traps. You cannot see them in advance unless your party has a high scouting skill, and the only way to avoid them is to take a different path. When you do get into a fight, the game switches to a JRPG style of combat. Each character takes 1 action per round using one of their skills, with the fastest characters going first. It's a fairly simple system, and if you have played turn-based RPGs before, you will feel right at home. During fights and dungeon crawling, you need to keep track of not only the HP of your characters, but also their stress level. It increases when they take critical damage, get hit with certain skills, trigger traps, and a billion other things. Stress healing skills and curios are rare, so you must avoid stressing out your characters at all cost, unless you want them to go crazy and eventually die. You can return to the hamlet once you have completed the mission objective, or if the situation seems bad, return prematurely to save the lives of your heroes. Back home, you sort the loot you have collected, send stressed characters to chill out at the abbey or the tavern, pick a new mission, assemble a new team, and repeat. Now, before we get into the horrifying game mechanics, let's talk about the part of the game that gets universal praise. The aesthetics of Darkest Dungeon are simply amazing. The game has a very distinct and consistent art style that applies to everything. The hamlet, the dungeons, the monsters, and even your heroes. Everything looks rotten, decayed, and evil. This game practically radiates corruption and depression. Here's a good example. There are a few villagers that will randomly block one of the spots in the tavern or the abbey every week. I mean, just look at them. These are the people we are trying to save from the ancient evil. Are they even worth saving? The hamlet looks devastated and abandoned, with buildings barely holding together. But once you upgrade everything, it will eventually look like a place where people can live. The characters you recruit don't look like heroes. They are instead rough and hurt, just like the world they live in. In fact, if you haven't played the game, you would probably mistake a lot of heroes for enemies. That's not to say that enemies and heroes are similar. The creatures you meet in the dungeons are 10 times worse than any hero can be. Yes, there are fairly normal bandits and cultists, but the vast majority of monsters are horrifyingly evil in their own ways, depending on the location. Ruins are full of undead skeletons of all shapes and sizes. Warrens are infested with pig-like abominations. Cove is crawling with evil marine life, and Weld hosts all kinds of eldritch monsters. The sound design is also fantastic. The ambient sounds of the hamlet, the heavy footsteps and rattling of armor as your party makes their way through the dungeon. The cries of monsters as they perish from your attacks.
A singular strike.
And the terrifying sounds of critical hits landing on your characters.
A hand's breadth from becoming unwound.
The cherry on top is the voice of your ancestor. He narrates and comments on everything that's happening on the screen. If you play the game, I promise you that some of his lines will stay with you.
The match is struck. A blazing star is born. A time to perform beyond one's limits. Continue the onslaught. Destroy them all. Their formation is broken. Maintain the offensive. Remind yourself that overconfidence is a slow and insidious killer. Wealth beyond measure, awarded to the brave and the foolhardy alike. Destroyed. Success so clearly in view. Or is it merely a trick of the light? Teetering on the brink, facing the abyss. Self-preservation is paramount, at any cost. Another life wasted in the pursuit of glory and gold. Wounds to be tended, lessons to be learned.
I could listen to him commenting on my life decisions all day, but we have to move on to the next segment, which is... This is where the opinions split and the problems begin. Unfortunately, the game does have quite a few issues with its learning curve. Let's get into it one step at a time. First off, when you start a new game, you can choose between 3 difficulties: Radiant, Darkest, and Stygian. Now, after you've chosen the difficulty, you play through a short tutorial that teaches you the basics of navigation and combat, followed by another scripted dungeon with a preset theme. These give you a very basic understanding of the game, just enough to not get lost. There are also helpful pop-ups that explain certain mechanics. And that's it. And it would be enough if Darkest Dungeon was a simple game, but it's not. Not at all. Let's look at accuracy, for example. Every skill has an accuracy stat that defines how likely it is to hit the enemy. People often look at it and think that 95 accuracy is enough. After all, that's a 95% chance to hit, right? Then they get into a fight, miss half of their attacks, lose their entire party to 4 funny spiders, and uninstall the game. What the game doesn't tell you is that a lot of enemies have a high dodge stat, which reduces your accuracy against them. And as you get into harder dungeons, every single enemy will have high dodge. This means that if you want to hit anything at all in this game, you need to buff your accuracy as high as possible, by any means necessary. Another example is the speed stat that defines whether your character will go before or after the enemies. It may seem insignificant at first glance, but if you go last every round, you might as well surrender straight away. On the other hand, if you go first every round, you can cripple the enemy team and secure victory on round 1. As such, accuracy and speed are everything, but the game never tells you that. It's only after you lose a character to a pack of dogs that you realize something is wrong, and that even the hardest hitting attack is worthless if it cannot hit the enemy. In fact, most of the game is like that. It's pure trial and error, everywhere, all the time. To understand how to fight certain enemies, you need to first see their stats and what their skills do. To understand what supplies to bring into a dungeon, you need to first learn what enemies and curios you can meet there. To build a good team for a boss fight, you need to first learn the gimmick of the boss, by sending the first team blind. This is intended, and the entire game is built upon that. You're supposed to try, fail, and learn from your mistakes. Obviously, this kind of learning process is not for everyone. If you don't have time to learn by smashing your head against the wall, you can always cheat by looking up information on the Darkest Dungeon wiki. I would personally recommend against that, as it kind of defeats the purpose of the game, but sometimes it's the only way to learn certain things. For example, there is the Antiquarian character. If you recruit her, you might notice that the majority of her skills and stats are extremely weak for no apparent reason. What the game doesn't tell you is that if you use her to interact with loot bags and chests, she will find extra loot that's worth a ton of gold. If you know about this, you can use her to massively boost your economy by going on gold farming runs. But if you have no idea, she's basically useless, except for a few cheesy strategies. How come the game doesn't mention her special ability anywhere? Well, Darkest Dungeon works in mysterious ways. Speaking of mysteries...
Ruin has come to our family. You remember our venerable house? Opulent and imperial, gazing proudly from its stoic perch above the moor. I lived all my years in that ancient, rumor-shadowed manor, fattened by decadence and luxury. And yet I began to tire of conventional extravagance. Singular, unsettling tales suggested the mansion itself was a gateway to some fabulous and unnameable power. With relic and ritual, I bent every effort towards the excavation and recovery of those long-buried secrets, exhausting what remained of our family fortune on swarthy workmen and sturdy shovels. At last, in the salt-soaked crags beneath the lowest foundations, we unearthed that damnable portal antediluvian evil. Our every step unsettled the ancient earth. But we were in a realm of death and madness. In the end, I alone fled laughing and wailing through those blackened arcades of antiquity, until consciousness failed me. You remember our venerable house, opulent and imperial. It is a festering abomination. I beg you, return home, claim your birthright, and deliver our family from the ravenous, clutching shadows of the darkest dungeon.
So, your ancestor calls you back home to clean up his mess, and proceeds to crit himself in the head with his plus 15 accuracy, plus 3 speed pistol. You answer his call, and now it's up to you to purge the ancient evil that has infested these lands. And that's exactly what you will be doing most of the game, exterminating all kinds of big and small monsters, and eventually venture into the darkest dungeon itself. Unfortunately, there is not much story-wise in this game. Regular missions lack any sort of narrative elements, but boss-killing missions actually give you something. Each of the 4 main regions has 2 unique bosses, and each of them needs to be killed 3 times. Every time you start a boss mission, your ancestor will explain his relationship with this particular boss. Some of them used to be his business partners, while others were created by him.
My zeal for blood rituals and summoning rites had begun to ebb, as each attempt invariably brought only failure and disappointment. Progress was halting, and the rapidly accumulating surplus of wasted flesh had become burdensome. I could not store such a prodigious amount of offal, nor could I rid myself of it easily, possessed as it was by unnameable things from outer spheres. When excavations beneath the manor broke through into an ancient network of aqueducts and tunnels, I knew I had found a solution to the problem of disposal. The spasmodically squirming, braying, and snorting half-corpses were heaped each upon the other until at last I was rid of them. The warrens had become a landfill of snout and hoof, gristle and bone, a mountainous, twitching mass of misshapen flesh fusing itself together in the darkness.
Aside from that, each of the characters you can recruit also have their own backstories, which are illustrated in short one-page comics. They're not in the game though, so you'll have to look for them online. The rest of the story is packed in 4 final missions that require you to go into the darkest dungeon itself, which are only doable if you prepare a lot of good max-level heroes with proper items. I'm sorry, but I will not be spoiling any of the darkest dungeon quests. They are something you absolutely have to experience by yourself. I promise you, if you buy the game and make it to these missions, they will make you feel emotions that you didn't know you could feel.
Oh my god, bro. Oh, hell no, man. What the fuck? Huh?
I have already explained the basics, so now let's take a deep dive into the absolute madness that is Darkest Dungeon gameplay. I will start from the hamlet and go on from there. When you are in the hamlet, the first thing you will be checking is the stagecoach. This is the most important building in the game, as it provides you with fresh heroes for hire every time you return from an expedition. Most of these heroes will be level 0 babies who can barely stand on their own, but they are free. Which means it's technically impossible to lose in this game, as you always have new fresh meat to recruit. Next up in importance is the Abbey and the Tavern. These two allow you to remove stress from your heroes, which you will be doing constantly. The process is not instant, so if you send a hero to chill out, they will not be available for the next expedition. Up next is the Sanitarium. When your team returns from a raid, every team member has a chance to get a positive quirk, a negative quirk, a disease, or all three at once. These can either be amazing or horrible, so the Sanitarium lets you remove them or reinforce them, for a price. The treatment process takes time, so once again, the heroes inside will be unavailable for the week. The Blacksmith and the Guild allow you to upgrade your heroes' equipment and skills, respectively. The higher the level of your heroes, the better the gear that you can buy for them. These upgrades are absolutely essential to their survival, as they affect things like HP, speed, accuracy, damage, and other stats. It may seem expensive at first, but the investment is worth it. The Nomad Wagon sells trinkets for very unreasonably high prices. Trinkets are important, as they can be equipped on heroes to provide massive bonuses, but you really shouldn't buy them, at least not in early game. You will get most of them by just completing missions, so save your gold for character upgrades. The Graveyard serves no purpose other than to remind you of all the heroes you lost. I have actually only lost 3 heroes on this save, so most of what you're seeing here are low-level heroes who were sent to die in order to skip a week in the hamlet. Yeah, you can do that to skip the Sanitarium and Abbey wait times, or to reroll mission rewards. There is also the Survivalist, who allows you to unlock additional camping skills for your heroes, but I will cover these later. Now let's look at heroes themselves and use Crusader as an example. Every class has different base stats: max HP, which is self-explanatory, dodge, that reduces the accuracy of incoming attacks, protection, which reduces incoming damage by a percentage, speed, which defines if the character will move before or after others, accuracy modifier, which in this case is provided by the equipped trinket, base crit chance for every attack, and base damage. Now the skills. Every hero has a total of 7 skills, but can only have 4 selected as usable. You can switch equipped skills in between fights if needed. Let's look at Crusader's basic attack, his Smite ability. It can only be used when Crusader is in the front of the team, and can only hit the front of the enemy team, which is represented by yellow and red dots. It has a base accuracy of 105, so I guess now is the time to explain accuracy. Your chance to hit the enemy is calculated by taking your total accuracy, in this case 105 from the skill, and plus 10 from the equipped trinket, reducing it by enemy dodge, and adding a hidden plus 5 accuracy bonus. So if the enemy has 40 dodge, that's a 80% chance to hit, which in this game is almost a guaranteed miss. This skill also adds an additional 4% chance to crit, and deals 35% extra damage to unholy enemies, aka the skeletons. His stun skill is a good example of how debuffs work. On top of regular stats, this skill has a 140% chance to stun, which forces the enemy to skip their turn. So this skill has to hit the enemy first, and then try to apply the stun through the enemy's stun resist. So if the enemy has 50% stun resist, that's a 90% chance to stun. Decent, but could be better. His heal is thankfully very simple. Can be used from any position and, well, heals whoever you decide to heal. His stress heal is more of the same. Click on someone to give them a tiny heal and take 8 depression points away. Also increases the torch level, which we will get to later. Holy Spear is where things get interesting. It can hit the enemy backline and has a very high crit chance, so it's an amazing skill to get rid of annoying assholes in the back. The problem is, it moves you forward and can only be used from the back, so even if you put Crusader in position 4, you can only use it twice before you are out of position. This seems like a problem at first, but as you learn more heroes and their moves, you can actually combo it with other characters who move forward, to dance as people call it. The simplest example of this would be a fast hero going first and pushing the Crusader back, and Crusader going last and pushing the fast hero back into the initial position. Repeat until the enemies stop moving. The camping skills can only be used during camps on medium and long missions that provide you with firewood for it. These skills usually buff, heal, and de-stress your characters. Now let's look at the map. This is where you select which mission you would like to go on. There are 4 main regions: Ruins, Warrens, Weald, and Cove, each with its own unique enemies and interactable curios. What this means is that every region requires a specialized team and its own set of supplies. The skeletons in Ruins cannot bleed, but can be blighted easily. On the contrary, the pigs in Warrens bleed easily, but are resistant to blight attacks. You get the idea. Ignore the courtyard and the farmstead for now, as these are DLC. When you click on a mission, it shows you its difficulty, length, objective, rewards, and in this case, the town event it will trigger upon successful completion. Mission length defines how big the dungeon will be, and how much firewood you are given to camp. The difficulty defines how dangerous the monsters inside will be, and imposes some hero level restrictions. Low-level heroes can be used for harder dungeons, but they are likely to get killed because of their low stats and resists. High-level heroes, on the other hand, cannot go on low-level missions at all. What this means is that you should try to level all your heroes equally, so that all of them can be used together when needed. Once you have picked the mission, you assemble a team of 4 heroes and equip them with trinkets. There are countless trinkets, some class-specific, some universal, and all of them give all kinds of buffs and penalties. Ultimately, it's up to you to figure out how to distribute the trinkets you have among your characters. It should come as no surprise that one of the most popular trinkets is the Focus Ring, which gives you a lot of accuracy. One final step before the departure is buying provisions. Every single mission will require you to stock up on food, torches, and shovels. Food is needed for periodic hunger checks, camping, and can also be used to manually heal a hero when not in battle. Torches are interesting. When you are in raid, you have a torch meter that gets lower as your party moves through the dungeon. When this meter is full, your heroes get a lot of passive bonuses, but if you let it go low, your heroes will take a lot of extra stress damage, and the enemies will receive massive accuracy, damage, and crit buffs. You get more loot when it's dark, but it's not worth it whatsoever. Please bring torches. Shovels are needed to break through blockages that you will come across every once in a while. If you don't have shovels, you can destroy the blockage by hand, but that will massively stress out your entire party. Please, bring shovels. The rest of provisions are mostly region-specific. Anti-venoms remove blight, bandages remove bleeding, herbs remove debuffs, keys open locked curios, and holy water buffs resistances. It is important to note that all of these can be used on particular curios for great benefits. Normally, most curios have a good chance to hurt you or do nothing. But if you have a correct item to use on them, they can offer tons of loot, stress heal, or buffs. If you ever see this altar, try using a torch on it and see what happens. Now, when you actually get into the dungeon, it's time to move. The map shows you the layout of the dungeon, but not the things that wait for you there. Scouting can help you with that. Every time you enter a new room, there's a base 40% chance to scout ahead and reveal all the curios, traps, and enemies in nearby rooms and corridors, assuming your torch level is high. There are trinkets that increase the scouting chance, and if you have them, you should consider taking them. Not only do they make your life easier, but high scouting chance can also help you to reveal secret rooms that contain high value loot. Traps will also be a concern. Every region has its own traps. In ruins you get hit for high damage, in Weald you get blighted, traps and warrens bleed you, and cove traps apply a massive long-lasting debuff. It's not all bad, however, as if you scouted the traps, you can attempt to disarm them for a decent stress heal. Some characters will be better at this than others, so choose carefully. The main danger, however, is the random enemy encounters. While every region has unique enemies with their own skills and stats, there is some consistency to what you're going to fight. As a rule of thumb, the enemy frontline will either have direct damage dealers or tanky units who protect others. The backline will be full of fast and evasive creatures who deal stress damage, buff others, heal, and make your life harder in general. One of the simplest examples of how enemies work together is the 2 basic enemies in the Weald. The 2 mushroom dudes in the front are very tanky, but don't do much on their own. Their basic attack is weak and very inaccurate. But that's where the little mushroom dudes in the back come in. They have an attack that can apply a mark to your characters, while also reducing their dodge. If any of your heroes is marked, the dudes in the front can now use their other attack on them, which has a much higher accuracy and deals way more damage. If you know about this combo, you can either focus fire the backline to prevent them from marking your heroes, or stun them, or remove the mark itself with certain skills. Most of the enemy encounters will be like that. If you let them act freely, they will destroy you with various synergies. But as you get better, you will learn which monsters to prioritize, and how to control the flow of the fight. This big guy, for example, will shuffle your entire team and then apply a tree branch directly to the head of some unfortunate soul, sending them straight to death's door. But if you can debuff his accuracy or stun him, he becomes a glorified punching bag. Since I mentioned Death's Door, let's talk about how health and stress work. When your character loses all of their HP, they don't die, but instead go to Death's Door. In this state, they receive severe debuffs and take more stress damage. Every time they get hit in this state, they have to pass a death blow check. By default, every character has a 67% death blow resist, which means every time they take damage, they have a 33% chance to die. Any amount of healing is enough to get a hero off of Death's Door, but they will retain a small debuff until the end of the mission. Stress is interesting. Many things do stress damage, but as long as your stress is below 100 points, it doesn't affect the hero whatsoever. Once they do get to 100 though, they will either become afflicted or virtuous. The chance for the former is 75%, and for the latter is 25%, but it can be modified with trinkets or quirks. When a hero is afflicted, they become a real burden for your entire team. First of all, depending on the affliction, they will start doing random things out of your control. They might randomly switch positions, attack enemies, attack teammates, refuse heals, pass turns, or interact with curios. But the worst of all, they will keep inflicting stress upon other team members. While one afflicted hero is manageable, 2 or more is a good reason to scrap the mission and return home.
Failure tests the mettle of heart, brain, and body.
Second, if the afflicted hero reaches 200 stress, they will have a heart attack. It causes them to lose all of their HP and go straight to Death's Door. And if they are already at Death's Door when this happens, they just die outright. I hope this highlights the importance of stress management. Now, sometimes the hero will become virtuous, and that moment will be a blessing for you. First of all, they will immediately reduce their stress to 45 and will not have a heart attack if they reach 200 stress. Instead, they lose the virtue and reset their stress back to 0. Depending on the virtue, the hero receives various buffs to their stats and can stress heal themselves or your team, buff teammates, or heal them at the start of their turn. You won't experience this often, but when it does happen, it's a gift from God. And so, that's what you do in this game. You explore the maps, manage your supplies, fight all kinds of enemies, deal with stress, and ultimately try to get rich and build a roster of powerful heroes, to one day attempt to go into the darkest dungeon itself. Let's close off this section by talking about some fun combos you can do in this game. The hero Highwayman has access to a skill that moves him forward, does decent damage, and most importantly, activates Riposte for 2 turns. Riposte is essentially a counterattack. Whenever he gets targeted, he strikes back. Bring 2 of them and watch the enemy team self-destruct trying to hit them. It's even funnier when you also bring a Man-at-Arms, who also has the Riposte ability. Grave Robber has a very powerful lunge attack that deals high damage, but it launches her 2 positions forward. She also has a skill that moves herself back, but you waste a turn doing it. Instead, bring 2 characters who can move after her and push her back into the initial position, allowing her to lunge again. Dancing at its finest. When people look at Jester, they often see a character who stays back, buffs his team, and stress heals when needed. It is viable, but not exactly fun. If you want fun, try his solo and finale skills. Solo launches him in front of the team and gives him a massive dodge buff. Stack enough dodge on him via buffs and trinkets, and he will become immortal as long as the solo buff remains. When the buff does run out, use the finale skill. It is charged by using his other abilities and deals devastating damage, while also sending him back into the backline. It debuffs him pretty heavily though, so make sure you don't use it too early. Want to play on easy mode? Get 2 shield breakers. She has a skill that hits the entire enemy team, applies damage over time, and moves her back 1 position. 2 of them can keep doing this dance forever, absolutely destroying teams of 4. And if you do come across big monsters, she also has a skill that hits any position, completely ignoring any protection they have. And if she is ever in danger, just use a skill that gives her 2 blocks that completely nullify 2 instances of damage. Sounds balanced, am I right? Then again, she is a DLC character, so this is a perfect time to talk about DLC. Let's start with free DLCs, the Butcher's Circus and the Musketeer. Butcher's Circus is an online PvP mode that lets you fight other players, but the skills and trinkets are very different from the base game. I haven't played it, so I cannot comment on it. If you have a friend who also plays the game, go for it. I don't, so yeah. The Musketeer is an additional character for the base game. She is a reskin of the Arbalest class, having the exact same stats, skills, and items. It would be a decent DLC, however, there is a problem. While her items have the exact same stats, they are in fact separate from Arbalest items, and cannot be interchanged between the 2 classes. You might get a really good Arbalest item, only to not be able to use it since you only have the Musketeer, or vice versa. Not recommended, even if it's free. Crimson Court is the first paid DLC, and oh boy, it's something else. Looking at the reviews, you might think it's complete garbage, but it is in fact amazing, just very hard. Crimson Court introduces a lot of new stuff. First off, there is a new area, the Courtyard, which is filled with new Bloodsucker enemies. Their designs are amazing, their skills are very unique and refreshing, and they also infect your characters with a new disease, the Crimson Curse, that cannot be cured in a sanitarium. It also introduces the infestation mechanic. Once you complete the first Crimson Court quest, Bloodsucker enemies will start spreading into other areas, gradually becoming more and more common. This will eventually result in a lot of your characters being infected with Crimson Curse. And what does the curse do? Well, it turns your characters into blood addicts. Infected characters get more and more debuffs the longer they spend without consuming any blood, and if you don't give them blood in time, they will just die. You get blood by fighting bloodsuckers, but it's not easy. The only way to get rid of the curse for good is to go into the courtyard and kill all 3 new bosses, which will end the infestation forever. That is easier said than done, as each courtyard mission is extremely long, full of stress and danger, and will probably take you a few attempts to complete. The rewards are great, however, as you will not only get rid of the curse, but also can find new unique trinkets, which are extremely powerful. Combining 2 Crimson Court trinkets also gives the character a set bonus, which is a very nice addition. The DLC also introduces a new character, the Flagellant. This guy is an amazing addition to the base game, as he is not only a frontline healer, but also a bleed damage dealer. He can inflict heavy bleeds with his attacks, heal teammates by bleeding himself, which may seem bad, but when he's on low HP, he gets to use powerful abilities that also heal the Flagellant himself. Great character, 10 out of 10. Another new addition is the district system in the Hamlet. It allows you to construct new buildings that give passive bonuses of all kinds. It's a great way to spend extra resources and is very helpful when going into the hardest parts of the game. So look, people really don't like this DLC because of the Crimson Curse and the infestation mechanic. But the thing is, it's meant for experienced players. It's not meant for people doing their first playthrough. So what you should do is buy this DLC, but only enable the Flagellant and the districts when playing for the first time. Save the courtyard part of it until you're a bit more experienced. Overall, great DLC, highly recommended. Next up, this Shieldbreaker. She is a new character and a very unbalanced character. Her skill set trivializes a lot of the fights, and bringing 2 of them completely breaks some areas. She is, however, somewhat balanced by her unique mechanic, the Nightmares. Every time you camp with a Shieldbreaker in your party, you have a 50% chance of getting into a nightmare fight with snakes that haunt her memories. These fights are hard and can mess you up if you are not ready. These are pretty much guaranteed to stress the hell out of her, so it's best to avoid camping with her if things are already looking grim. However, once you beat all 7 of these fights, they're gone for good, and the Shieldbreaker can sleep well once again. Overall, a decent DLC, just not very well balanced. Get it if you want an easy mode character, or just more variety in general. And last but not least, the Color of Madness. This DLC introduces a new region, the Farmstead, which is full of new enemies and bosses. The quirk of this DLC is the fact that every Farmstead expedition is an endless horde mode. You fight non-stop until you can't fight no more. Now, I find this kind of gameplay boring and not fit for this game, but that's just me. The longer you hold on against the hordes, the more crystals you get, which are a special currency that can be used to buy the new trinkets introduced by this DLC. Some of these trinkets can be absurdly powerful, and in case of characters like Abomination, boost the hero from being mediocre to being really good. Color of Madness also introduces a new roaming boss that can show up in any region, the Thing from the Stars. The Thing is very powerful and full of bullshit mechanics that will make short work of your party unless you are prepared. Ironically, the Shieldbreaker breaks this fight as well, as she can bypass the Thing's defenses. Sometimes you fight fire with fire, but in this case you fight DLC with DLC. Overall, all the paid DLCs are worth it, especially on sale. If you can only get one, I highly recommend Crimson Court, as it's full of content, and the hard part of it can be turned off until you are ready. Now let's talk about some things that are annoying even if you're a fan of the game. First off, the genre. The developers call this game a roguelike, but this is, in my opinion, incorrect. Calling it a roguelike can give people wrong expectations, which can result in them getting disappointed and frustrated. If you're interested in this game, know this. Darkest Dungeon is a permadeath RPG and not a roguelike. When you think of roguelikes, you think of games like FTL, Hades, or Enter the Gungeon. When you lose in these games, it's no big deal, as you just start another run and try again. In Darkest Dungeon, failure is a tragedy. If you lose 1 or God forbid 4 high-level characters, that sets you many hours back. These characters take a lot of time to level up and a lot of gold to upgrade, and getting good quirks can take forever. So when you lose them, it's not uncommon to feel the urge to rage quit or even uninstall the game. Now, it's not necessarily a bad thing, as it keeps the tension high at all times and makes you care for your heroes. But it is important to understand that this game is super punishing and it will piss you off at times. Let me also elaborate on the grinding aspect of this game. You will spend a great amount of time just leveling your heroes and farming gold or trinkets, and Crimson Court together with Color of Madness only add more grind into the equation. This game is very grind heavy, and an average playthrough will take you about 100 hours if not more. That's a lot. You could play on Radiant mode that cuts down on the grind, but it isn't very good in my opinion. It speeds up the game so much that you end up in the end game almost immediately. So while it is an option you can try, I don't like it very much. Then again, it's up to you. Overall, the main issue of the game, if you could call it that, is the time investment. The game demands you to grind, learn, and then grind again until you make it. And if you are determined, you will eventually succeed. If you aren't, then this game is likely just not for you. And that is totally fine. So, is Darkest Dungeon worth your time and money? As always, it depends. If you are a hardcore type of player, this game will be right up your alley. There is a ton of content, endless variety of builds and combinations, and a big challenge to overcome. The game demands a lot from you, and will punish you for every mistake you make. It may seem unfair at first, but if you put in the effort to learn and improve, it will reward you. As the Ancestor says, the Darkest Dungeon tolerates no weakness. It is no place for the weak or the foolhardy. It expects you to fail, and challenges you to prove it wrong. And if you are up for the challenge, it has plenty to offer. The lows are very low in this game, but the highs are sky high. Every loss is a tragedy, but every victory is a triumph. If you enjoy that kind of gameplay, definitely give this one a try. If you're a casual player, I would be careful. You can reduce the difficulty in the settings or install mods that make the game easier, but that goes against the spirit of Darkest Dungeon. Make it too easy and there will be no point in playing it whatsoever, as challenge is the core concept of this game. Ultimately, it's up to you. Okay, this video took so long to make that I almost went insane myself trying to make sense of it. Next one is probably going to be something less insane and more fun. I do want to cover the games I mentioned, especially FTL, as I absolutely love it. Anyway, thank you for watching until the end, and see you next time.